traditional publishers are now looking on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, and they're trying to find these books that have this unknown viral audience, and they're offering to these to these authors, and then they're traditionally publishing these books on the back end. So there's a lot of there's actually a whole new path now to traditional publishing through the indie space, but you have to be very lucky and you have to sell a lot of books, right?
Do you love science fiction and fantasy books? You found yourself in the right dimension. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stuernagel, and I will be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors, helping you to get to know them and possibly uncover some new literary gems along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I am so excited about this interview with Rebecca Thorne. I was really blown away that she said yes to come onto the podcast, but we had such a blast and such a great time. I really think you're going to enjoy this interview. We talk about everything from her journey into cozy fantasy, as well as her thoughts around cozy fantasy. We also talk about her journey from traditional publishing into self-publishing and then back into traditional publishing, and how it all played out in her getting Can't Spell Treason Without Tea picked up by Tor. It is really a great conversation, and I hope you stick around for it. I do just want to make a note, today is also the release date for my own cozy fantasy, the Bartender Between Worlds. So make sure you pick a copy of that up. It is available pretty much anywhere you can buy books, at least online. If you want to buy in your physical bookstore, please ask them for it. They should be able to order it in. But you can get it otherwise on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, any of the major platforms, and you can also find it on my website, hermanstuernagel.com. Also, one other thing, please, if you're listening to this when it goes out on Tuesday the 23rd, that I do have a launch party for the Bartender Between Worlds this evening at 5:30 Pacific Standard Time. I'll be joined by Adrian Gibson, the host of SSF Addicts, ZS Diamanti, author of Stone and Sky, and SL Rowland, author of Cursed Cocktails. We will be over on the FanFiAddict's YouTube channel. I'll link that below as well. But if you're listening to this as it goes out on Tuesday, please stop by and check that out. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're just going to be hanging out and chatting about my new book and whatever else comes up. If you're watching this later on, head on over to that channel anyway, because the replay will be up, and I'm sure it'll be a fun conversation. Thanks again, and enjoy the interview. So welcome once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I am super excited to have a very special guest today, USA Today bestselling author Rebecca Thorne.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great, Rebecca. How are you doing?
Doing well. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. Can you just kick us off and tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your writing journey?
Yeah, so my name is Rebecca Thorne. I've been writing for a really, really long time, but most people just found me really recently, like the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I write cozy fantasy, but mostly I write fantasy with lesbians and like really great romance. Although I do have one book called The Day Death Stopped, but it's like up above me. And it is, it's more of a like reflection of humanity and what makes good and evil, basically. And that one does have lesbians, but they're peripheral. The main character is actually asexual instead. So basically queer characters just kind of all around. And I love to put them in situations that make people question, like, well, what would I do in that case?
Yeah.
I think that's like my favorite thing to tackle in my writing. So
yeah, very cool. Yeah, and like you said, I think a lot of people probably who have found you now might look at your story as, it's kind of one of those classics. Oh, it looks like an overnight success, but really, yeah, there's been a long history behind it. So when did you start writing?
So I started writing when I was 11 years old.
Nice.
I am 32 now for comparison. And and I'm actually really glad I started that young, because I knew this was always my dream. I had the passion. I was like, this is my desire. I'm going to be a best-selling author. And I never put a timeline on it. It was like, I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to do it. Right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Like some people are like, oh, I want to hit it before I'm 30. I'm like, I don't care if I do, like, I've got other things going on. I'm good,
Mm-hmm.
But But I always knew that this was my dream. So I spent my high school experience just writing whatever I wanted, which I think was very valuable because I got to experiment with all of the tropes, right? All of the cliches, right? Like every cliche you can think of a high school student to write, like I wrote that back in high school and I got it out of my system. So by the time I became serious about pursuing publication and turning it into more of a business, I didn't need to fall into a lot of those things that like writers of my age were doing at the time, you know, and not to say my writing was good back then either, because like it still took me, I mean, I did traditional publishing for almost 9 years.
Okay.
Like I queried for 3 years. I was agented for 4. It took me about a year in the beginning to kind of gather my wits and figure out like what I was even doing, you know, before I even started querying.
Right.
So it was a long process. I did sell one book with that agent and it was a very small release. It was a middle grade book called The Secrets of Star Whales. And I actually got the rights back to it now because it sold so poorly that I was like, no, it's out of print. Give those rights back to me. So I might re-release that later. But yeah, it's just been a really long journey. Things started turning around when I decided to tell traditional publishing that if they're not going to accept me, I don't accept them. And then I went to indie publishing and everything took off in a massive way. And now I'm back with traditional because they did, in fact, my dream publisher said yes. And I was like, yes.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, definitely a lot there. I want to hear more about. So you were actively pursuing writing though, ever since you like 11. It wasn't like for myself, I kind of gave up for a while and then decided, no, this is, you know, the thing I want to do. But you've been pursuing it, you know, ever since you were a kid, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people do that where they like enter the workforce and they're like, oh, I have to do the real job.
Yeah.
And I did that over college. Like I very pointedly took a writing break for the 4 years I was in college because I was just like, I don't want to do it anymore. And then I started working at United Airlines as a flight attendant out of college. And that job was like, I mean, like, I'm not joking when I say I worked 16.5-hour days.
Wow.
We got, 7-hour overnights. We were lucky to get 5 hours of sleep before jumping into another 14-hour day.
Wow.
Lots of people, lots of delays, lots of cancellations, just a bad work environment.
Okay.
And I looked at myself, I mean, I was 3 months into that job, and I looked at myself, at 22 years old, and I was like, oh my God, this is all I'm ever going to be if I don't take steps now. Like this is all my life will ever be, is because like once you're a flight attendant, you don't leave that industry. Like you get pay raises every year. And most people who are flight attendants have been doing it for 30 years or more. Right. Like we have flight attendants at United that are 55 years in.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, I don't want this to be all I am. Like I don't want this job to be everything that I am moving forward.
Totally.
So it was a very easy like transition at that time to just pick writing back up and be like, okay, no, that was what I wanted to do. Took a break for college, time to get back at it. So
right, yeah, and you're still a flight attendant, correct?
Like I am. Still doing that yeah, I work with Southwest now, so it's way better.
Okay, good. Good. Are you still working those kind of crazy hours though?
No. Okay. Southwest is a huge quality of life jump for me. Like I left United after 1 year, and I've been with Southwest for 10 now. So
okay.
So it was a massive quality of life shift. Like our days cap out at 12. Like we start getting double time if we go over 12.5 hours. So it's way better. And I'm almost capped out in pay. Like the pay right now is, and we just got a contract after 5.5 years of negotiating. So it's a good job. I love the benefits. And frankly, the thing that I love the most about my job is that I get to meet people on a daily basis, and they are very good at reminding me that there's a bigger world outside of my little ecosystem.
Right.
Like I fly to all different parts of the country. We have all different cultures and ethnicities on our airplanes. Like I've been on flights where like I'm the minority as the white person,
right.
Which I think is really, really good to see because the country is so varied and so vast, and we get so many different perspectives and cultures just kind of meshing together, but they all work somehow, like it's really, I love my job. I think it's just one of the most inspiring things I could have ever done. So
yeah, that's great. And, such a great input for, your writing as well, to see all this happening as well. Like for those of us that spend their entire day behind a desk, that sometimes gets tough.
Yeah. Well, and like I notice it because like I took all of like my writing really took off last year. I basically took 8 months off of flying. I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And I missed it because I missed getting outside of my office, right? Like when you only see these 4 walls all day long and then you work a trip and you're in, 4 cities or 5 cities a day, it was like, I'm like, oh, I can never quit. Like this has to be my job forever. Like I can't miss out on this perspective and this reality check. just
Yeah.
because I'm enjoying a comfy life in my office now with some good money coming in, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So.
that's really cool. So, like,
Mhm.
do you write while you travel then, or do you kind of write when you're at home? How do you work in your writing to your schedule then?
For sure. Yeah, I definitely write on the jump seat while I'm flying. I
Okay.
try to pick longer flights because we don't get paid for boarding or deplaning.
Hmm.
And I will say with our new contract, they built in like extra rigs so that we get paid more for like the day that we work. So we kind of get paid for boarding and deplaning, but like technically we're not divvied out any money for that. So
Okay.
I try to pick longer flights that, 5 hour, 6 hour flights that will give me more money because I'm paid for the airtime rather than the boarding and deplaning. Because when you're doing, all that, it's just kind of chaos.
Right.
And then eventually on those flights, people get to the point where they don't want to see their flight attendants anymore. Like you could do the first service, you do the second service, you do trash, and then you go out and just kind of mosey through, and they're all just like, "Leave me alone, I want to watch my movie."
Right.
So at that point, I kind of go back up to the front, and I am writing on the plane. So.
Okay. Cool. Very cool. So you talked about, you've been writing since you were 11.
Mhm.
You've been writing, so writing has definitely been a part of you for your entire life. I'm interested to know what's the why behind your writing? What motivates you to continue to tell stories?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I think it's to show that there can be a better world than the one that we live in. Like I think that we're all a little disheartened with the way that things have been going in the politics and the economy and the people in power and the corruption and things like that. I think we're all just a little tired. So like my cozy specifically, we're definitely like, well, what if there was a world where like it wasn't weird to be queer? Like what if there was a world where you could just be openly gay and everybody would accept you and it was not weird, like
Yeah.
that is something that I really enjoy. Like the queer normative worlds are something that I love building into all of my books, even the ones that are like really ruthless. Like This Gilded Abyss is a terribly tragic, horrible book, but like it's not horrible in the people, queer people aren't accepted way. It's like
Yeah.
horrible in more of like a classist way. So I don't know. I think that that is something that I really love to put in. I feel like that's something that I'm very strongly passionate about. I would say the other alternative is what I kind of mentioned before about the shades of gray, like what makes a good person and what makes a bad person and what kind of decisions are they making that make them good or bad, that are labeling
Hmm.
them good or bad. And like, where's that gray area? Because like certain people can make terrible decisions that feel right at the time. And then hindsight comes in and you're like, oh no, that was a bad idea,
Yeah. Right.
And we might label those people the villain, but in the moment they really thought they were doing good, So I love
Yeah.
diving into that kind of idea, like the shades of gray. So.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love
Mhm.
that. I do have a question. You mentioned so like that queer relationships form a big part of your stories. Why is it? I find that for cozies especially, it's a
Mhm.
big part of cozy stories. And why do you feel that that is?
I think it's really interesting. I have a lot of opinions on cozy fantasy right now,
Okay.
and some of them may not be flattering. I feel like cozy fantasy was wonderful because Travis Baldree started with Legends and Lattes, and Travis Baldree, he's married to a woman, and I don't know his sexual orientation, but I'm assuming it's straight, and he chose to write a lesbian couple and he did it really well. Like, and I'll admit, like, I first picked up that book and I was like, oh, it's written by a man. Like, oh, this isn't going to be good. Cause like I've read so many bad ones and he just nailed it,
Hmm.
like he just nailed like the tender feelings between these two people. It felt like a relationship. It didn't feel like it was two women. It was just like they're two people and they're
Yeah.
falling
Right.
in love, and I really loved that. But I think that choice to write two women really helped make that like cozy space LGBT friendly from the start.
Hmm.
Like people felt safe going in with their queer characters in this genre. It wasn't
Yeah.
like the romance genre, which is like, typically white, straight women, right, that are writing in that genre. Like queer people were welcome from the very start into cozy
Right.
fantasy. And that's why I think you're seeing so many cozy fantasies with queer characters moving forward. But I'm almost a little sad because I feel like we have kind of stopped at the LGBT representation and we haven't gotten a lot more diversity. Like cozy means something in every culture and it's
Hmm.
something different in every culture. And I'm not seeing any, people of color going in and addressing what their definition of cozy might be. And then I kind of think that relates back to the privilege that white people have to feel cozy at all. Like you can't have
Hmm.
cozy without pain, but some people get stuck in that pain cycle depending on what their level of privilege is, and so they
Right.
can't even fathom writing a book about cozy characters because their life is so hard already. You know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
is where I kind of get like my heart is kind of breaking for the cozy fantasy genre right now because I feel like it could be so much more. but
Right.
it's just not quite welcome in that way for a lot of those diverse voices. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting and a
mhm,
great perspective. Do you feel that that'll change? I mean, because Cozy, I feel like, I mean, it's only a few years old in the
mhm,
sense that, the Legends and Lattes inspired Cozy.
yeah.
Um, do you feel that it'll kind of change as we kind of grow into the genre a bit?
I really hope so, because I'm not going to lie. If we continue on the trajectory that I've been, like, I get a lot of cozy books in my inbox that are coming out, in the future, and I'm seeing just a lot of let's open a shop, let's enter a community that we thought was previously hostile and find out that they're really nice,
Hmm.
and I just feel like that's going to get very old very quickly for readers.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I really, with the, Can't Spell Treason Without Tea and the Tomes and Tea series, it's a quartet. There's 4 books. It follows the 2 main characters, Canth and Reyna, through all 4 books. And the first book is about them opening the shop. And then every book after that is about something completely different because I wanted to explore, like, well, if I get cozy vibes where they're still sitting by the fire, they're drinking wine by a river, but then maybe they're on a pirate ship as well. It's like, okay, well, that's a little
Yeah.
more interesting than some of the alternatives that you're seeing, right? So like every book is going to be something completely different, but with the same characters that makes it feel like you're coming home. So like
Right.
that city, that town that I've created, Tawny and New Leaf, the barn is going to be very cozy and welcoming for people. But then there's all this stuff happening outside of the barn, like outside of their little ecosystem that directly affects how they live their lives. And to me, that's what I would love to see Cozy doing. I'd love to see Cozy evolving naturally, like how do we
Yeah.
get past the shop opening stage and into something else that is also cozy but has maybe more strife and angst and drama attached to it, and it's a
Yeah.
fine
Right.
balance to walk. Like it's a hard thing to do. I know a lot of people have told me that my books are too high stakes to be cozy, and I'm like, that's your opinion, like I feel good when
Right.
I write them. So
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, that's really interesting too. But I think that you're bringing people into, or you're bringing readers into an environment that they're somewhat familiar with, within the cozy sphere as it exists. As, bringing them into this tea shop, but then you're kind of like expanding from there.
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely and frankly, it's been a lot more fun for me as a writer because I always ask myself when I'm writing a book, like, what would the character do next? And I've been asking that for the series too. Like every single book, I'm like, well, what would the characters do next? It's like, oh, well, in book 2, they're going to try and find the dragon eggs. So like that was going to take them out of their town and into. So where do I want to explore that area? Like in book 2, I'm like, well, what area of their world do I really want to target? And so I picked this really massive river super far west, that has like this like a bunch of cultures along it, and then pirates are on the river because like how often do you see river pirates,
yeah,
right?
right.
And then in book 3 it was like, well, they got engaged in book 1, so naturally they got to get married, but like, then there's also a coup happening in the background, so it ends up being
Nice.
kind of like a heist story. Like
Oh,
it's
awesome.
it's just all kinds of fun. So
Yeah.
it's been a really cool journey. I've really enjoyed the singular stories inside a connected world type quartet, where they're
Hmm.
like standalone stories, but you get to follow the characters all the way through. So
Right.
every time I open a document with them, it's like coming home. I'm like, oh, this is so nice.
Nice. Yeah, I imagine that makes it easier, for from a writing perspective, because you don't have to kind of redo the world building and the character development. You kind of
hmm
have that
Yeah.
already.
Well, and what I'm noticing now is I'm writing the sequel to This Gilded Abyss, which is a trilogy that takes place over the course of like a week, right? Like the entire trilogy is done in like a week.
Right.
And that has been very difficult for me because I have to remember every single thing that happened in book 1 to
Hmm.
carry over those plot points into book 2 and then
Ooh.
book 3. And it's a completely different vibe. Like with Treason, I could just jump back in anytime I wanted to write a sequel. Like I wrote one in August, I wrote one in December, and by the time I got to the 4th book, I turned that one out in 10 days because I knew
Hmm.
the characters, I knew the world building, and I knew what kind
Right.
of story I wanted to wrap up the series.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
but the second book of Gilded Abyss has taken me a lot longer because it's a continuous story that you have to pull over 3 books and then make every book interesting. And how do you do that? Like that's hard. So yeah,
Right.
different
Yeah.
kind of
So yeah, for sure. So Gilded Abyss is a single, like you have a single arc then throughout the entire trilogy. Is that
Yeah, yeah. So
okay?
it follows these 2 women who, this is funny. It follows these 2 women who go down in this like Titanic like luxury submarine, to this underwater city. And while they're on the submarine, a zombie apocalypse breaks out, and they basically are like fighting for their lives at the bottom of the ocean,
Oh wow.
trapped in a submarine. And I released that book 9 days before Ocean Gate happened.
Oh.
And I was like, oh man, I got the best boost in marketing for that. Like my book
I bet.
definitely went viral because it was like 9 days before these billionaires got trapped in a submarine. And now I just found out they're going down again, and I'm like, cool, I got to
I
get the
saw
sequel
that.
ready.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so then, but then the whole rest of the book is like, okay, well, what happens after that happens, right? Like they obviously can't get trapped in that submarine forever. So what's the next step? So book 2 is them inside the underwater city that they were going to. And then, no spoilers for book 3 because it's going to be really intense. So,
Cool. Very cool. So I was taking a step back to cozy fantasy for just a second. Why do you? I've had a few cozy authors on, and I've asked everyone this, and I like to see the varying opinions. Why do you think cozy fantasy is having its day right now? After why did it hit so hard with Legends and Lattes and has continued since?
yeah. I kind of think that it's related to the pandemic, and I'm sure a lot of cozy authors have said that. I think that the types of books that we're reading as a culture are directly reflecting the types of books, the types of experiences that we had in recent years, right? So like
Mm,
the dystopian era came, right after the '08 crash, so like everybody wanted to read about society reforming after something like that, right?
right.
I would say, and what's interesting to me too is that if you expand even out past cozy, like everybody wanted something, people want like lower stakes after something like a global pandemic, but if you expand even more and you look at like this surge in romantasy, which is, I mean, just a marketing tactic, like they've had romantasy as long as romance and fantasy have been a thing, but
Yeah.
they've branded it romantasy, and that's becoming so huge now because, and this is my theory, I don't know if it's true, but if you look at a lot of people who were locked down during the pandemic, you'll see that a lot of people had divorces. A lot of people realized their
Yeah.
spouse was not the person that they thought they were. A lot of people ended up in, and I hate to say this, but like I know a couple people that ended up in abusive situations because they were
Mm,
trapped in a house with somebody who ended up going a little crazy, like because they were trapped.
yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, of course, naturally as a society, these like people who married these men, I'm going to assume it's mostly men, and,
Mostly.
and
Yeah.
they are not super happy with the way that man actually is in close confines in long-term periods. Of course, they would start to then move into a genre that would give them the protector, right? Like the character, the alpha male protector character with the wings that feels a little too good to be true, and he's a royal, right? Like who doesn't want to fall into that kind of fantasy especially if you're looking at
Right.
your own relationship and missing some of those elements. So,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of really interesting psychology around it, and I think cozy goes along with every other type of genre. So,
For sure. Yeah, that's a really interesting
mhm.
theory and one I hadn't thought of, but I think you're probably right because I mean we definitely did see that through the
Mhm.
pandemic and coming out the other side of that I think
Yeah.
people are looking for, that escapism,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, they're, it's easier to fall into a book than to maybe make some hard decisions in your own life, and I don't know if that's entirely the case. I'm sure there are plenty of people that are incredibly happy with their spouses that still really love that because I think that is just one of those universal fantasies to find some really, alpha character that you can fall in love with who will protect you and love you. Like even lesbians want that.
Yeah, of course.
Mhm.
Of course. Cool. So I want to talk a little bit, I guess, about your writing journey a little bit more because so I didn't realize that you had been traditionally published already,
Mhm.
and then you went. I shouldn't say back. You went to indie publishing,
Mhm.
and now you're back to trad pub.
Yeah.
Uh, so I guess first of all, I'm going to have to reframe my question a little bit, but maybe not. Why did you decide to self-publish Can't Spell Treason Without Tea initially?
Mhm.
And then how did that all play out as far as Tor picking it up?
Yeah. So treason was, I always say that I've been very, very lucky. And then I always have my very close friends slapping me upside the head because they're like, a lot of what you did was luck, and a lot of what you did was strategic to place yourself in a position to get luck. And I
Right.
think that that's just kind of the difference between someone who's brand new on the writing scene and someone who's been around for a decade and who's watched trends come and go and who's seen how publishing works. So because I spent so much time in traditional publishing, I know that the pathway to traditional publishing, the way that books start to go down that pipeline is that if there's a trend happening now, they were acquiring those books 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And so in 2022, when I picked up Legends and Lattes, I picked it up off a book in Barnes and Noble, and I was like, holy shit, this was self-published. Like, but I found it in my Barnes and Noble, and that shattered everything for me that I had previously been told, because all I'd been told in the traditional space was you can't get books in bookstores if you're not traditional. And I
Right.
literally was like, but this book's here. So like, what don't I know? And then I found out about Ingram Spark and everything else, and learning that if booksellers are really passionate about an indie book, they will stock it in their stores as long as it's available for a discount somewhere. So that kind of helped kind of tweak some brain chemistry where I was like, oh, like I'd been with my agent for 4 years at the time. We'd sold one book, but I felt like we were kind of drifting apart as far as creative, visions go. Like I had a different idea of where my career would go than she did, I think, by that point. So I picked up Legends and Lattes and said, holy, and then I looked up into it and I saw that Tor had picked it up in like 4 weeks. Like they find that book so freaking fast. And I was like, oh my gosh, like Tor has been my dream publisher forever. And I literally thought to myself, I'm like, when this book re-releases, everybody and their mother is going to be looking for a book like it, because like, there's no way this book does not become a bestseller. Like there's no path for it. Right. So in March of that year, right as Tor picked up that book, I decided to leave my agent. I left her in April and I started writing this book in May. And I wrote it through May and June of 2022. And I said, cause I knew to myself, I said, when everybody's looking for a book like this, they're going to be picking it up in like November or January or March of next year, right? Like they're going to be moving quickly on these books and they're going to try and get them out as fast as this rapid release did for Legends and Lattes. And if I can write a book that is good enough to get on people's tongues in an indie sense and maybe get it into some bookstores, people will recommend it in the same breath as Legends and Lattes, and maybe I'll get, and I wasn't expecting Tor to pick it up. I was hoping that would happen, but my brain was like, well, I'm, like times are tough and I'm a flight attendant and I can barely make rent. Like maybe I could make an extra $1,000 a month to help pay my rent, right? Like that's what I was hoping for. And that did end up happening the very first month. And then it just kind of like exponentially climbed from there, because the minute Legends and Lattes hit, exactly what I was hoping would happen happened. And everybody who read Legends and Lattes said, well, where's more books like this? And there really weren't any at the time, because cozy fantasy wasn't known to people at the time,
Right. Yes.
And so I put out that book, and there were obviously books that fell into the genre after, like there's plenty, like Half a Soul and the Society of Irregular Witches. Like all those books had been published right around that time anyway, so they were very nicely funneled in. But my book was an indie book that was very pointedly made to appeal to Legends and Lattes fans. Like if you read Legends and Lattes and you read my book next, you're going to see so many similarities in that first book, and then I kind of take that series and run with it. So, but that was a strategic marketing move on my part,
Of course. And very smart.
So that's where it's like, I was lucky because like that December, my sales like quadrupled. Like I was doing good before, and then my sales just like flew off a handle. And I think I sold like 5,000 copies in like December alone for Christmas.
Wow.
Yeah. And then January, Illumicrate actually reached out to me and said that in the UK and said that they wanted to publish my book. And through a really weird circumstance, I got in touch with a literary agent through a literary scout who'd also found my book. And I was like, I'd really prefer to work with an agent. She goes, well, I know this agent, and that is now my agent. And she took that offer from Illumicrate and then leveraged it into a 4-house auction that Tor UK ended up winning. And then once I expressed interest in potentially publishing it in the US, like Tor UK got on the phone with Tor US, and they bought the book as well. So it was kind of like this like massive snowball effect that literally took me 6 months from publication to hear that I was going to have my book sold to both of them. But again, like I think that was a lot of luck. Like it was lucky that Illumicrate found my book. It was lucky that this literary scout just so happened to read my book and connect me with the right agent. It was lucky that my agent had all these connections to leverage that auction. But I will say, like, I did look at the trends at the time and know that indies can pivot faster than trad. So
yeah. So I think there's obviously luck involved, but you also were pretty strategic in making yourself lucky.
Right? My friends like to say, well, and I think Travis Baldree is the one who came up with this analogy, like if publishing is waiting for the lightning strike, right? Like there are people who go out and they have massive acres and acres of land and they just spend years putting it on lightning rods, right? Just waiting for one of them to get struck. And then there's some people who walk out into the field and they hold their finger up and they get struck, and you never really know. But the people who have been out in the field a lot longer, I think, are better poised to take that. Because I've written so many books in the past, when Tor offered, I sat down and I published 3 more books that year. I was like, I'm building my backlist and I'm going to vary what is in it because I don't want people to think that I'm only a cozy author, right? Like I put out the Fielded Abyss strategically because I want people to know that I can write really heart-pounding action in addition to cozy, and that was very important to me to kind of like show that I have a wide range of whatever kind of books I can write. So again, just more like strategic marketing as I move forward to help shape my brand so that I'm able to take advantage of a lot more opportunities in the future because I've already proven myself in the past. So
For sure. And that's a really cool strategy though, because a lot of, especially in the indie space, a lot, you'll hear the advice that, stick to one genre,
mhm.
stick to one certain type of writing so that your readers will keep coming back to you.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but you're kind of doing the opposite, and
right.
which I love to hear,
Yeah.
because I can't write in a single subgenre either. That would drive me absolutely
Well, and that's me
crazy.
too. Like I've always been the kind of person who jumps genres. Like I've written in every genre under the sun at this point, and every kind of
Right.
character you can imagine. But I will say, like, I am with a bunch of, like, I'm in a server with a bunch of really high grossing indie authors. Like I'm talking like they're making $25,000 to $50,000 a month off of their books,
Right.
right? Like insane. And their tactic is that because they know where their readers are. So like, for example, I can look at how much money Treason has made, and it's made me, 5 times or 7 times the amount of money, even as an indie book, than This Gilded Abyss has made me. So they
Yeah.
just hit that over and over, right? Like if they know that people love my version of Cozy, I know that I can get them coming back more and more and more with more versions of Cozy. I just didn't care. I want this book out there for my own creative vision and to show that I'm
Hmm.
varied. And then I do think that there's still an audience for that if we can get it to the right people. It just might not
Yeah.
be as
Right.
like massively rabid as the audience for Cozy is right
Exactly.
this
Yeah.
moment. But that's not to say in 5 years Thriller won't completely shoot up off the charts as people get tired of
Exactly.
Cozy. So
Yeah, and then you have these books in your backlist that people can go back and
exactly.
find, and they might take off then, right?
Yep.
When
Yeah.
you happen to have them now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I always like to think of it too as you're building your legacy for your author
Mm-hmm.
career, right? Like it's not. I mean, I think it's easy to look at. Okay, well, this is popular right now. I'm going to write this and only this, and this is what I'm going to write forever and ever. But is that what you want your body of work to look like
Right.
20 years from now?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some people that are completely content in their own genre, but I'm pretty ADHD. I move from task to task to task. And I think that translates into my writing pretty well. People are just like, oh my God, you're writing what? I'm like, what? you know? I do think that there is a nice thread through my writing about like the writing style, right? Like if you like the writing style of Treason, you're going to like any of the other books I've written because they all have that like witty banter, that cinematic action, the really good dialogue. Like they move through the story quickly, and that's just my writing style. So I think
Right.
that can be a thread as well, with authors. Like if they're looking to branch out into different genres, you will often get a lot of readers who jump those genres with you just because they know that you're a really good writer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. I'm gonna, I know we're getting way off the questions
No,
I
that's
sent you,
totally
so I
fine.
hope you
Yeah.
don't mind. But I do have another question, kind of from what you were saying before, and I'm just curious. Like, I found you through TikTok, and I
Mhm.
think a lot of people probably have.
Yeah.
How much do you feel that played into Treason Without Tea getting noticed
A ton.
before it got
A
picked up?
ton.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Travis Baldree had a really, really solid following of especially indie authors because he's a narrator for indie authors.
Yeah.
So he's been in that space forever, and everybody who he's narrated for was able to boost his book when he finally came out with it. And he's really, really big on Twitter. Like I think he's got like 15,000 followers or something like that on Twitter.
When Twitter was still, useful.
Yeah, right. Like it's just a different type of like I'm partial to threads now if I'm going to be doing something text based, but I really value the video sense because you can explain yourself better. Like there's less chance of it being misconstrued, and then it's harder to make a response to a video than it is to just respond to a text based conversation. So I think conversations on TikTok are more nuanced, and I think that they are more carefully thought out most of the time than something on Twitter where you can just like respond quickly and be done with your day.
Right.
But yeah, I think that, for me, I was looking at TikTok, and again, all these things kind of happened right at the same time for me. That February 2022, I was in a master's. I got my master's of fine arts in publishing and oh my gosh, what was it? Publishing and writing, popular fiction writing. So like popular fiction writing and publishing is my MFA. And I was in this course, and the professor he ended up getting a job at the end of the semester where he became the head acquiring editor at Disney's press. So like, I don't know if he's still doing that job, but at the time he like got hired by Disney's press to like pick up. So like he was walking the walk and talking the talk. He only taught one class a year, because he was just too busy with his job otherwise. But he had some fantastic insight into the industry from a publishing perspective, from like a big 5 house publishing perspective. And one of the things he said to us, like he got into our class like day 1, and he was just like, all of you need to be on TikTok. And I was like, why? I'm like, I don't want to be on TikTok. Like TikTok sounds awful. No, I don't want to do it. And he was just like, he's like, you don't understand. He's like, we could pin trends before TikTok. He's like, we have no fucking idea what's going to go viral once TikTok entered the picture, because it started to become about the masses and the people who want to read these kinds of books, like Colleen Hoover, Frida McNadden, like all of these, Sarah, Rebecca Yaros, right? Like all these people got this massive, massive level of fame in the last few years, more so than if you look back at 15 years from now, like those people went viral, but they didn't really go viral to the, speed that we're seeing people go viral on TikTok, right? And that's true even today, so he was like, get on TikTok. You're basically losing business if you don't try TikTok for a while, And I was like, all right, I'll get on it. And so I started scrolling, and that's actually where I first saw Legends and Lattes. And that was why I knew to pick it up in the bookstore. Like I gravitated right to it because I was like, oh, I've seen this on TikTok. So clearly, and then part of my brain was like, wow, it worked, like, wow. So yeah, I definitely think TikTok. And then I think that I really have a passion for publishing education. I love to talk to people about their publishing paths. I think that I'm a very encouraging person. Like I get very excited when I hear writers doing the thing, right? Because so many people have the idea to write a book and they never do, So I think that the people who pursue that are very, very special people. And I think that personality comes through to the point where, like, by the time I was ready to publish Treason and Tea, I had built enough of a following off those other things that people were excited for me. Like they wanted to support me because I'd given them so much help and advice and encouragement over the months before. And I think that that's probably still true today. Like I go in and I promote my books, but if you look at the promotion videos versus like the education videos, it's like 30% to 70% education, right? And that's just because that's what I want to use my platform for. Like I think that's interesting.
Definitely.
But now my publisher's like, make more videos about your book. I'm like, meh. So.
Yeah, I think that's been to your benefit though, because people are sticking around because they want to learn something, right? Like I have a hard time with that on my TikTok. My TikTok is 100% self promo, but it's just because that's all I have the brain power for.
Right,
like,
right.
Here's what I've got the time for. Here's my book.
Well, and the self promo videos can work really well if you structure them right and like you hit those universal fantasy notes. There are some authors that only do that and they sell hundreds of thousands of books.
Right. Yeah, and what finally got me onto TikTok was I'm sure you've seen Adam Beswick's TikToks. He writes the Vanity and Valor. They're like dark fantasy.
I'm not sure if I'm on that side of TikTok. I'll have to look him up. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but anyway, so he just does is basically him, and he writes some text and shows his book, and that's all his videos were.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and they were doing really well.
Yeah,
I can do that.
Yeah.
So, right. So, but to that point though, like. I think people value if you're going to teach them something, they value that more.
Right.
And that's what's going to bring people to see that other 30% of your content.
Right. Well, and that's exactly it. Like, I do think that there's a little bit of a hesitating point there when it comes to education, because like we're just seeing now, like we're seeing a lot of people coming in with education tips that maybe are not based in any kind of experience, like they don't have the credentials to really be educating. So when people come and ask, how do I make a platform like yours? I'm like, you kind of can't, like you can. I mean, anybody can go in and start teaching publishing, but I have, all of this experience, the MFA, all of these networking hours of, research, like, and then I've done it on all sides, right? Like I can prove that I've been successful as an indie and as a trad author. And so when I go and I talk about those things, I have that credence behind me.
Definitely.
But I always tell people, I'm like, listen, like, I talk about education because that's what I'm passionate about. And that shows in every one of my videos. Like, I can't wait to tell people about their publishing options. Like, it is a passion in my soul, So I tell them, I'm like, what are you passionate about? Like, what's your interest? Because when you're going on social media, everybody wants to watch somebody who's passionate, because if you look at the world at large, very few people are actually passionate about anything. Like I have multiple friends where I'm like, what's your passion? And they're just blank stare, like they have no idea. So I am always like, well, if your passion is dinosaurs, get on and talk about dinosaurs, and then maybe toss your book in the end, or maybe you add a dinosaur to your book and then you get to talk about your book because it has dinosaurs in it. Look at how much of an expert I am in that, If your passion is crocheting, get on and teach people how to crochet, and then mention that you write books on the side, there's always a way to get an audience for something that you are interested in, because there's always going to be people that are niche like you, like they like the things that you like, even if you think that you're alone in that. You're not alone in that. So So yeah, I think that that's always my recommendation. I'm like, figure out your passion and go on and just lose your mind over it. Like people love that
Right.
kind of stuff when you go in and you start
Definitely.
talking about those passions. So
Definitely. Yeah. And there's what, a billion, like there's like a billion people on TikTok. So
mhm.
chances, like there is somebody
There is
else on
somebody there who
TikTok
will be
that
interested in what you have to say. Yeah, it's like it's
exactly.
amazing.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we talk a little bit about your book. We kind of talked around it and we talked about the genre. Can you tell our listeners who might not be aware or familiar with you what Can't Spell Treason Without Tea is about?
Yeah, so Can't Spell Treason Without Tea follows two lesbians. They are not roommates. They are not friends. They are, in fact, lovers. I get that a lot, where people are just like, "Oh, they're friends. I didn't know this was a lesbian romance." I'm like, yeah, they're not roommates. So they are. So these two women. So Reina is a guard to a very vicious queen. She's like a royal queen's guard to this very vicious queen, and she lives in this very fancy palace. And she, hunts assassins for a living, basically, to protect the queen. And Kianth is her partner, and Kianth is the most powerful mage, like elemental mage in the realm. And the two of them found this like unlikely relationship with each other where they like kind of met in the palace and like fell head over heels from like first glance, and then they started like this like very clandestine romance, and they've been doing that for 2 years by the time the book starts, so it's an established romance. And at the beginning of the book, Reina is just tired. She doesn't want to murder people anymore, and she's just like, what I would really love to do is open up a bookshop that serves tea. So she just like leaves her job and goes into the forest, and Kianth finds her, and they're both just like, okay, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to abandon all of our responsibilities and we're going to make a new life for ourselves together because we really want to live together. And the whole rest of the book is kind of them forging out a space for themselves in a world that wasn't planning to give them that space. And then kind of the little nuances of like moving in with someone, like, like there's always a little bit of a bump in the relationship when you first start to move, start to live with someone. Like, how do you guys have communication styles? How do you resolve problems? How do you, cohabitate one space together? And then of course there's dragons and magic and like all kinds of and like dueling lords. Like there's these two lords in the town that are like both trying to get control of the town, but they both think that they're the only lord. So like there's a lot of like really fun like character nuances that happen throughout with the backstory. But the main story is just about these two characters deciding that they do in fact want to choose each other every single day. And I think that
Yeah.
that's, one of the most beautiful things that happen in love. So.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's such a fun book. I do love that. It's not two people meeting each other and
Mhm.
falling in love. They're already in an established
Yeah.
relationship, and you're kind of developing that kind of in the middle of their relationship or partway through their relationship,
Yeah.
which I think is it's fresh as well.
Hmm.
Um, and I also love your response to your reviews about lesbians.
Yeah, for
um,
context, when I first
yeah.
published this book as an indie author, like brand new baby indie author, I published this book in September, and by November, I had 3 reviews that gave me 1 star because the book had lesbians. Like there was no comment about the book itself. Like they didn't care about the plot, they didn't care about the writing style. It wasn't that the book was bad, it was just that it had lesbians, and they gave
Has
it 1
lesbians.
star. And I got
Yeah.
so offended by that I went to TikTok and basically was like, what line do we, like, I know readers don't want authors in their spaces and authors don't really want to be in reader spaces. Where's the line? Because like, I want to talk about these homophobic reviews, and everyone's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's the line. Like you can cross that and leap over and swim around in that pool as long as you want. Cause like, we don't abide by homophobia.
Hmm.
Which was really wonderful to find out because I was a little nervous about that. But since then it
Yeah.
has become a cornerstone of my branding to basically waive those reviews. And I've gotten more since then, on multiple books, but people just really don't like reading lesbians. I don't know. There's a lot of
Yeah.
homophobia.
Yeah, I mean, and that's totally what it is, because I mean, it's literally they exist
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
and it's like, really,
Well, and
really.
I'm just like, can you
And
imagine going onto a book and being like, oh, had a straight couple, hetero, one star,
1 star.
right? Like no one would ever.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not even that, like, it's not a heavy romance in
Mm-mm.
that sense. It's
Yeah.
just they're here.
Yeah,
Like,
they're here,
really,
they're living, they're
really.
people,
Yeah.
like, yeah, like there's not like sex on ever, like there's not even sex at all in the first book, like there's no
No.
spice at all. The only time I added spice in this entire series is there's a one shot at the end of book 2 that is very, very hot and heavy, and I wrote it because I heard somewhere that Cozy was akin to clean fantasy. Like the Christians had tried to take it and be like, oh, we love this genre because it's clean. And I was like, no, you don't belong in this genre. Like, no, it's not clean. So I wrote a very spicy one shot kind of in retaliation. So like book 2 is my spite book. I doubled the lesbians because I got those 1-star reviews. I dedicated book 2 to those people. And then I started putting it all over my branding. So
I was gonna bring up your dedication to that book because I absolutely love that. I think that is hilarious.
Yeah, I got
double the lesbians.
I got very annoyed, and I was like, you know what? Now there's 4 lesbians.
Oh, I love it so much. I do want to. I know I'm jumping all over the place here.
Okay.
But I do want to know, like, do you have advice for indie authors who might be, or any author, maybe someone who's just writing their book, who would like to get into the trad pub space and is maybe looking at, what's the best way to kind of get their attention at this point?
Yeah, so there's a really interesting phenomenon happening in publishing right now, in this moment, where traditional publishing used to be king, and now with the distribution options that indie publishers have. Like when I first started publishing, it was true that indie authors could not get into bookstores. And that's why that myth prevailed for so long. Now a company called Ingram Spark has actually started opening up distribution to indie publishing, and Ingram Spark has its own problems. Like if you've ever dealt with it, they're a nightmare. But they do offer discounts, and they are tapped directly into the systems that booksellers have access to. So booksellers can buy that book for a discount and stock it in their stores and make a little bit of a profit. They just have to go looking for those books, right? Like they have to go find those indie books. And that's where TikTok kind of comes in to help them learn about those books.
Right.
So you can still go the traditional route where you query an agent and you go on submission and you have a book that maybe gets really lucky. But like I personally had 3 books die on submission. Like we never got past, like I got an agent and we still couldn't sell the book that I got the agent with, or 2 others after that, and it's very disheartening, I thought. So I kind of decided to go indie because I was like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with the gatekeeping, So what we're seeing now is a lot of stories that are popping up like mine to a very intensive level where traditional publishers are now looking on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, and they're trying to find these books that have this unknown viral audience, and they're offering to these, to these authors, and then they're traditionally publishing these books on the back end. So there's a lot of there's actually a whole new path now to traditional publishing through the indie space, but you have to be very lucky and you have to sell a lot of books, right? But yeah. I will say, I actually feel like a lot of people are like, oh, that's so annoying that they're preying on these indie authors who are making good money and they just want to get their cut of the pie. And I'm like, well, yeah, but for comparison, I sold over the course of last year before they took over, I sold 15,000 copies of Treason. I sold that same amount of copies in 3 weeks with my publisher, it was insane. The volume, the distribution just can't be beat with trad, and frankly, they offered me enough money that I could quit my job tomorrow if I wanted to and do that. And that's not insignificant, right? So
for sure,
you actually end up going to the table with more negotiating power because you were an indie author first. Because if you think about any other industry, think about Shark Tank, right? The first thing that they ask in that show is, what are your sales numbers? That directly correlates to how much they're willing to offer on that product. Is what the sales numbers are. How much interest do we have in selling this product? And that's all that publishing is, especially once you get to the trad level. So a lot of people are able to go in and basically get better advances and negotiate for better terms in their contract because they can point to it and say, I don't need you. And the publisher knows that. So they know that in order to get these books, they have to sweeten the deal. But that's very enticing for these massive, big 5 publishers. They can buy a product that's proven rather than an unknown product that ends up in their submission list and that may flop out the door, out the gate, right? There's so many books where publishers have offered 6 figures on it and it just completely flopped and there was nothing they could have done, there probably was, but some of the books just aren't meant to be that way. So, it's interesting.
Yeah, you're kind of doing the proof of concept for them in advance,
exactly.
Right? They know that this is a viable book that they are going to be able to sell because you were able to sell it ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think my advice for authors who are interested in going traditional is to assess whether or not you have the stamina to promote. Because anytime you go indie, it's going to be a lot of work on the back end. Indie is not easier than trad. period,
Right.
full stop. It's just not, like you are responsible for making sure your book succeeds or fails. Like when I would take a day off of TikTok, I could watch my sales drop the next day. It was like, so
Right.
you never get a vacation. You can never not be online. You're answering comments all the time. As a trad author, now I've been able to take a step back from my platform and only log in when I really want to. And my book sales stay steady, stay steady, right? Because the
Right.
publisher's marketing for me. When you're in an indie space, it isn't like that. Like you do hit a tipping point, like every business, where if you get enough clients, you can, coast off of those clients. And that is the same with readers. Like you get enough loyal readers, they'll start telling all their friends. You can sell a certain amount of books steadily just because of the people who know you. But if you want new readers, you have to go on and make sure that they know you exist. And if they don't know you
Right.
exist, they can never buy your book, right? So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard anyway. I mean, if publishing were easy, everybody would have a book out. So
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I've heard even people who've been traditionally published, that publishers only promote a certain number of their books anyway, right? So even if you're traditionally published, you still might be playing that game where you
yeah,
gotta
yeah. So
be doing
with
that, right?
traditional publishing, and they do promote all of their books. The question is how much and how much money are they willing to spend on it.
Right.
So one of the pieces of advice that I got several years ago was the amount, like the advance amount directly correlates to how invested they are in your book, right? Like what your book is worth in their eyes is what they offer for that advance. And like it's nice to get a small, any advance is a good thing for most authors, but
Yeah.
I am at the point where I was like, when they came to me with Treason, my brain was like, well, if they're not offering more than six figures, I have no interest because I'm making $11,000 a month off this book anyway. So like, if they're not offering me six figures, what's the freaking point,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So like and then they came in with an offer that just like made my jaw drop. Like it was way more than six figures. And I was like, holy shit. So, it was one of those things. Like, I think that when it comes down to that marketing, like because they invested that much money in my book, the print runs are huge. Like I looked on Edelweiss and found out that Treason had a 150,000 book print run.
Oh
And
wow.
Pirates is up to 200,000 for some reason. I don't know why they're
Wow.
printing more Pirates, but they are printing more Pirates, which means that you can find my book literally anywhere books are sold. Like they tapped into every distribution that they had to put my book in stores.
That's amazing.
But sometimes you don't get that, right? Like my first book was
Yeah.
was like a mid-level press. They offered $1,000 for the advance, and my book was not in hardly any bookstores. Like I think I had like one Barnes and Noble per state that maybe had my
Mm.
book. And then once they sold out, they never restocked, and it was like, well,
Right.
no wonder that book never sold,
Right.
So I think it just kind of depends on how interested, and that's where I almost will caution some authors, like, if you get an offer from a publisher, it can be a really good thing. But gauge the terms and don't be afraid to say no if you feel like their passion is not there. Because like the editor may be super passionate about your book from the start, and they will be if they're offering on it. But the editor is not the person who promotes your book and not the person who markets your book and not the person who decides whether or not it succeeds out the gate, right? Like the publisher and all of their resources are the method for that. So if you
Right.
end up getting an offer, gauge how much it's worth, and then ask them what they're going to be doing on the back end for marketing. Because my publisher sent me an email that listed all the things that they did to market Treason, and it went on and on and on. And I mean, like I scrolled for like 5 minutes, like to get to the end
Wow.
of that email,
Wow.
and that's where it's like, that's the difference between a bestseller and one that flops out the door. And it's not that the book is bad, it's just that there wasn't a push behind it. And that is kind of the dark side of trad. There's only so much money to go around, and they throw a lot of resources at a few books. So
Yeah, right. It's kind of that adage where 80% of your sales come from 20% of what you're
yeah,
doing, and they kind of take that and put 80% of their money towards 20% of
right. Yeah, I
their
just
writers,
watched a
right?
video last night about that idea about the outliers, right? And how like
Hmm.
they were mentioning this art collector that came over from, World War II, from Germany, a Jewish man, and he started collecting art in the US, and he collected tons and tons and tons. Like any art he could find, he bought. And his collection ended up being worth millions of dollars at the end of the day, not because of all of the paintings he bought, but because of like two. Like two of the
Right.
paintings of the thousands that he did
Yeah.
made him more money than the rest of the collection combined.
Combined.
And that's
Yeah.
that's exactly how publishing works. I mean, there's the one or two books that make stupid money, and then there's the rest of the books that, just kind of fizzle. So
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Well, I do want to be mindful of your time.
yeah.
But I would like to know. I know you've mentioned that there are more books in this series coming out, but what else are you working on? What can readers expect from you next?
Yeah, so I'm currently writing the sequel to This Gilded Abyss, which is called This Crimson Ruin, and it will be out, I think, over Christmas. That's what I'm aiming for. I will say we are trying to potentially pitch it to my publisher to see if maybe they're interested in buying it. I personally think it would be a really good Nightfire book, which is an imprint of Tor that is their horror side.
Okay.
It's very like mildly horrific, but like mild horror, so it's, we'll see how that ends up going. But if they don't end up buying it, I'm going to proceed with self-publishing the way I always do. So, I've already got, my narrator lined up. I'll be able to get an audiobook out for This Crimson Ruin as well, hopefully, sometime early next year. And we'll be going with that. I also have a cozy sci-fi idea that I've been kind of batting around for a few years, so I might finally sit down and get that book on paper, which would be great. Cool. And then, of course, Treason has, it's a quartet, so book 1 came out in May, book 2 is out in October of this year, and then books 3 and 4 are going to be out by August of next year. So It's very rapid release. They literally, they knew how fast I wrote, and they were like, well, we can publish one every 6 months or 4 months, and I was like, great.
That's awesome.
And so they just are boom, 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 boom. So if you get involved in Treason and you don't want to read a book that is not complete or will take forever, rest assured the entire series will be out by August of 2025. So
yeah, that's really impressive for trad too. That they're
shockingly fast for trad. Yeah, shockingly fast for trad. And and it's crazy too because we're already I just got the copy edits for book 3. And they want those, due by July. We'll probably be working on copying, editing book 4 probably in September. And then it's just a lot of now you get to go on a book tour again, I'm doing 2 book tours a year kind of thing to go and promote this book. So it's a very fast, I think when they bought this series, they wanted to test out a rapid release schedule for trad and see if it garnered more interest than one book a year, which is what their goal is. So we'll see.
Very cool. Very cool. So it's time for our final question, which is my favorite question of the interview. So this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. So can you tell me how in a parallel universe, another decision might have affected another version of your life?
I love this question. So I think about this all the time. So when I was in high school, I was about to go to college and, my boomer parents were just like, you can't go for creative writing. We're not going to, and I had a scholarship to pay for tuition, but they were like, we're not going to pay room and board if you go for creative writing, And I was like, oh, and they're like, you need to get a degree that you can quote unquote get a job in. Right. And so I chose criminal justice because at the time I was like, I'll be a cop. And boy, I'm glad I did not go into that. But I'm the true crime girly in me was like, well, that sounds interesting, So I went and got a degree in criminal justice and then became a flight attendant. And then I started working on this in the past. I think a lot about whether or not I would have diverged and made this all happen if I had done creative writing in college, because all of the friends that I have who were creative writing majors in college, and I had a lot of them, they don't do that anymore, right? They got jobs. Yeah, they got jobs in writing. They got jobs in journalism, editing, copywriting, ghostwriting, whatever, right? And they got jobs in their field, and now they don't want to write their own fiction projects because they write all day, and they don't want to sit at a computer and write more at night. Meanwhile, I went into a job where I'm talking to people all day, and I'm working with my hands, and then I get to go to my hotel room, and all I want to do is unwind and write a book. So I think about that a lot. What would the difference have been if my dad had not sat me down and destroyed my dreams that day? What difference would it have been? How would that have turned out? So yeah, that would be my answer.
That's cool. That is really interesting and a great point. You know what? It reminds me, I had my grade 12 English teacher told me not to become a grade 12 not to become an English teacher because he's like, you'll never read another book for yourself.
Yeah, no, that's literally I'm noticing that right now, even as I start to get into the public, I'm inundated with blurb requests. Everybody wants me to read their book and give a blurb for the back cover. Yeah. I don't read for fun anymore. I have not picked up a book for myself in over a year and a half. And it actually is making me incredibly sad.
Yeah. I find that even because I do try to read the books of people that I have on the show,
Mhm.
and I don't even get to all of those all the time,
Mhm.
but it means that I'm reading, and a lot of people I invite on because I want to talk to them and I want to read their
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
but at the same time, it's like, okay, this book I have to read now
Uh-huh.
because I'm talking to this person
Right. It
this
doesn't
week,
matter
right?
what your vibe is. It doesn't matter what you
Yeah.
want to do. Like this is a job, like you do this because, and it's just, it kind of changes the tone a bit. I think that's
Yeah.
something, and I think that's something where I'm kind of like, when people come at me with that social media thing and I'm like, talk about your passions. And they're like, well, my passion is writing. I'm like, find another passion. Like talk about literally anything other than writing and you'll be a happy person, because you'll have diversity, right? Like you'll be able to not just do one thing, you'll be doing a lot. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for
yeah,
joining me today.
of
This has
course.
been
Thank
so
you
much
so much,
fun.
Herman. It was a
And
great time.
yeah, you're very welcome. Can you let our listeners know where the best place to find you is?
Yeah. So I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads. My TikTok is at Rebecca.Thorne, and it should be easy to find. I have the same picture across all platforms. My Instagram is Rebecca Thorne Writes. That's my handle. And then my Threads, I think, is also still Rebecca Thorne Writes. But yeah, those are the three platforms that I'm super, prevalent on. I go on there a lot. And if you wanted to check out my website and find out, more, latest news, subscribe to my newsletter or whatever else, you can go on to www.rebeccathorne.net. .net,
Wonderful.
not .com. So
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure to link all of that in the show notes. And of course, your books are available pretty much anywhere right now.
they are available pretty much anywhere right now. So
which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thanks once again. And I hope I get to chat with you again soon.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Have a great day.
It was. You too. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. As well, you can help support the show by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get early access to the show, as well as submit your questions for my upcoming guests. I hope to see you next time. Bye now.